So then lads, welcome back to another video. Chances are that at some point you've had the question asked to you before, Call of Duty or Battlefield? Well, my answer to that question, which is the right one by the way, is simple. COD's always going to have the better campaigns, BF is always going to have the best multiplayer. And yeah, simple facts, if you look at the multiplayer, you've got bigger maps, you've got vehicles, you got classes. But then in terms of COD campaigns, everything from the story to the graphics to the gameplay is just generally better. So around about 2016, DICE finally realised that they don't know how to make campaigns. So that's why Battlefield 2042 isn't going to have a campaign. And then 1 and 5 went for war stories, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Across the games, there are 11 war stories, 5 in BF5 and 6 in BF1. And today I'm going to be ranking them because I played through all of them. Now, given the nature of Battlefield campaigns, most of these are ranging from bad to mediocre, but some of them are fairly good. Now, it's going to be pretty hard to compare across two games because they do have their differences. Like, the BF5 campaigns tend to be much more open, while the BF1 campaigns are much more linear. And in BF5, this really annoying fucking feature where if you go close to an enemy, they'll hit you and you just fall over. But we're going to try and stick past those differences and rank them based on what I think. Well, let's get into this. Alright, so in 11th place, which is last place, we have Terra Alia from BF5. So Terra Alia, I think it's pronounced. You follow this French colonial soldier who I can't even remember the name of, who gets called to France to fend off the German invasion, and his brother's there too. It's got a sort of narration in the style that his older self is like telling you the story on some chat show, I think. And basically, the gameplay, it's a lot linear. Mainly, I guess linear at the start, but more open towards the end. That's where the general problem is. But I hate the gameplay. The level design is generally awful. It's got bad weapon placement. You only ever find like 5 weapons throughout the games. I play all these war stories on normal difficulties. This one is just way harder than all the rest, just because of how bad the maps were laid out, and it's buggy as fuck. Trust me. Animation spazzed out. You can phase through walls by mounting LMGs. You can see characters clipping through the map. Let's talk about the story. So the character you play as, he's got a massive hero complex. He really wants to be a hero. Then his brother is more down to earth. So, he keeps pushing to get to this castle occupied by the Germans. Oh yeah, by the way, the brother doesn't appear once during gameplay. He just disappears for that, only to be seen again in cutscenes. Then you get to the castle and the brother sacrifices himself to save you. Then you raid the castle and everyone takes a big photo at the front. And then the frogs just Photoshop you and all the other colonial soldiers out of the picture. And they only remember white people in the history books. And they don't list you as a hero just because you're black. I mean, it's good because it shines light on something that happened and a lot of soldiers that didn't get the recognition. It's such a shame they had to pair that with awful gameplay. So yeah, that's why this one's last place. So coming up on 10th place now, we have Avanti Savoia from Battlefield 1. You guys will recognise this one. It's when I did my first trying to beat a war story with a knife challenge. So where do I start about this one? It's like a COD campaign, not in a good way. It has all the bad aspects of a COD campaign, as in there's just a shit ton of enemies and your character's really overpowered. So the plot is you play as a member of the Italian army who's defending the Italian Alps against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and you're looking for your brother. You play as Luco Cococcia, looking for your brother Matteo, and it's narrated in the format of just like a trailer your character years later, but this time Luco's telling the story to his daughter on his birthday. Now, okay, at the start, basically, You have a suit of armor and a minigun. I take history. I know for a fact they did not have handheld fucking miniguns in World War II. Like, legit, even nowadays, most people would struggle to hold a minigun in just their hands. And also, like, it says in the description that you're a fucking volunteer, not a trained soldier. Legit, so how could you even hold a minigun in one hand? Never mind them being invented at the time, which they fucking weren't. And the suit of armor. No, bullets could pierce through armor. That's why they did not have fucking medieval knight suits of armor in World War One. Because, I mean, if that did work, why not just equip the entire Italian army with these suits of armor? But they fucking don't. So yeah, at the start, you get lots of enemies to make it for the fact that you have this suit of armor and minigun. Then, once you lose the armor and minigun, for like the dumbest reason, he just takes them off for no reason. It seems to forget that entirely and still gives you a shit ton of enemies. There's this one bit where you mount an AA gun, and instead of just taking out a few planes that you'd expected, pretty much the entire fucking Austro-Hungarian Air Force goes down on you. You can tank so many hits in there and just not die for some reason. Speaking of not tanking so many hits and just not dying, fucking flame troopers. I don't get it. There's so many flame troopers in this campaign, it's unreal. Now, for some reason, the flame troopers have so much fucking health, so much more than any of the unit. Even like the heavy units, which literally have suits of armor. So yeah, that kind of like makes the balance between easy and hard. The bits without flame troopers are too easy, and the bits with them are too hard. Then towards the end, you fight through this fort, go to the other side, and you find Matteo dead. That's meant to be like some plot twist. It was obvious from the start, and it's meant to be emotional. It made me a tiny bit sad, and that's it. It's still absolutely nothing compared to what the top 3 managed to make me feel. So yeah, pretty weak story, pretty weak gameplay. Moving on. Right, so number 9th place on our list goes to Under No Flag from BF5. This was the first one I ever played, not counting the ones that play when you first start the game. This is mainly regarded to be the worst war story in BF5. It comes close. So basically, you play as Billy Bridger, or Billy Bender as I like to call him, who gets recruited into the British Army for a special operation against Germany in North Africa. Doesn't even say which country, by the way, it just says North Africa in the description. Let's be more fucking specific than that. Some of you might recognize this one again, because I did my second trying to beat with a knife challenge, but since in BF5 enemies will knock you down when they get close to you, it's really fucking hard. Now, why they even recruited him in the first place is beyond me. Like, in literally every other war story, you play as either a soldier or a member of the resistance. Billy was a fucking bank robber, and not even a good one. Like, he stated multiple times that he was a failure when it came to bank robbing, and they only recruited him because he never gave up. They turned out to be a really good soldier. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Pretty sure a lot of people never gave up. In terms of gameplay, it's decent, I guess. Like, it starts off more linear, then eventually we get into a more open worldy formula, which is kind of good. So he infiltrates some base and blows up some Luftwaffe supplies, and then you try and call for help, but then the Germans hear your call for help and they come after you, and there's this pathetic attempt at an emotional scene, like the commander guy, who's sort of a second father to Billy, calls him useless, and then Billy goes on this sad rant about how when he was robbing banks with his real dad, he would call him useless all the time. And the commander goes like, back something, he's like, oh no, you're not useless, and it's meant to be emotional, and it's really failing. Good things about it, it's funny, I guess, like they capture this German soldier and put him in the trunk of a car, and then just forget about him. Like, there's this ending shot where he's just banging from the inside of the boot, and that's funny, I guess. Gameplay, mediocre. Story, god-awful, to be honest. Anyway, I'd say that those 3, that's all the bad ones out the way. We're moving on to mediocre territory now. Alright, that's all the bad ones out the way. Everything from here on is decent. So, number 8th place. Through Mud and Blood. This is in BF1, and kind of feel like I should have ranked this higher. I'm not sure, probably because I had a very bad experience with it. So I just really don't like tank gameplay in these games as much as I do like infantry. But let's talk about it. So you play as Edwards, who was a chauffeur before he became a tank driver, and you're introduced to this crew of 5, 6 if you count the tank, who they personify for some reason, and you're trying to stop the German occupation of France. Simple enough. So at the start, you basically go through some ruined towns, and then you get through the forest. Oh boy, the forest section is so bad. Like, you keep getting out the tanks and doing this such repetitive, like, base capturing thing. Well, there's this one bit where you take out a base and go back to the tank. All of a sudden, there's enemies in the base again. It's so full of like emptiness, like lack of emotion and characters, that bit feels like a tutorial. Then you finally get out the forest, thank God. Then you go through a town which is better, I guess. Then it finally ends with a battle against a bunch of tanks in a train station. So it was fun blowing up infantry and field guns, I guess, but that gameplay does get really repetitive at a point. I feel like tank on tank battles just wasn't enough. There's like one towards the start, then literally all the rest are in the final battle, which is really hard to do in a tank, by the way. I had to get out and use AT weapons because it was so hard. So yeah, there should have been way more anti-tank battles at the start. Then in terms of story, so it's actually pretty sad seeing your crew die off one by one. Like, it starts off with 5, 6, including the tank, as I mentioned before. By the end of it, there's only you and one other guy left. There's a scene where you get to play as a carrier pigeon. Some people liked it, I didn't like that. So yeah, obviously your tank's a lot more overpowered than it is in multiplayer, I guess. But gameplay against other tanks is pretty fun. Story. Right, so coming out number 7, we have the one that plays when you boot up BF5 for the first time, My Country Calling. I had pretty bad experiences with this one because it became kind of a chore because I had to do it 3 fucking times. Like, first when I got BF5 on EA Play, downloaded it on my PC, sat through it. Then eventually my EA Play subscription ran out. Then a while later, I got it free again on PlayStation Plus. Got it on my PS4, I had to sit through it again. Then when my PlayStation's hard drive just spazzed out, we eventually got it fixed, but all the games had uninstalled. I reinstalled BF5, my progress was gone, but I had to fucking sit through it again with no way of skipping it. Now, being like the introductory thing, it's divided up into 2. There's one kind of cutscene bit, and then there's gameplay as you kind of like play as different people in different corners of the war. Most of them are unnamed, but you play as this one guy who's from a different war story who we'll talk about later. I really like the cutscene parts, I guess, like the gameplay, the voice acting, fairly emotional, makes you care. Then, oh boy, the gameplay parts, they're just so bad. Like, there's this one bit when you're in Norway, and then you go on a bridge, and then you shoot people, then a tank goes through and you die. And then you're like on an AA, not an AA gun, I think it's an LMG on Twisted Metal, and then you die, and then you're in the desert in a tank and you blow things up. God, it's so shit. But the narration, I love the narration, the music, and it really leads on from BF1. Like, you see this one scene from a different war story, which I'll talk about later, being made into a statue. That's narration about the Great War ending and World War II started. It really made me wish that Battlefield 6 was like Vietnam and Korea that followed on from BF5. So yeah, the gameplay was bad, but the cutscene and narration was pretty good. Moving on. For number 6 spot on our list, we have Nothing Is Written, the last war story of BF1. I kept swapping this and my number 5 choice on this list around because they're really similar, and I kept judging in my mind which one was better. But I eventually put this one as number 6. So this one, it's actually a very educational one because before this, I had no idea that the Ottomans fought in World War One, but I guess I do now. So it's set when like the Ottomans occupy the Arabian Desert, and the local Bedouin tribes, who I also had no idea existed before, are kind of fighting guerrilla warfare resistance against them, led by a British officer called Lawrence of Arabia, who I think was an actual person, or was he just like a folklore legend like Robin Hood? I'm not sure. Basically, you play as this young Bedouin warrior called Zara, who basically does all the heavy lifting for the tribe. And so it starts off where you infiltrate the wrecks of this train, and you do some stealth against the Ottomans, and then you're about to get captured, but then backup arrives and kills them all. Then you meet the antagonist. Yeah, this one has an antagonist, which I don't really like. These war stories are really not the sort of things where you have antagonists, because it's not really clear heroes and villains in this. Especially because it's like the worst antagonist ever. Like, all he does is flirt with Zara, and then gets sliced across the face, then escapes captivity and dies almost instantly. So yeah, you capture him, and then you find out that an armored train's coming. Then you have to go around sending orders to stop the armored train. Like, you go around to bases and you send carrier pigeons. Then you find out that the prisoner, the bad guy who you took hostage, he's escaped, and then he tries to fight you, but you kill him. Then he tells you that he's sent the order for the armored train to arrive. Then you have to take over this rail town and lay explosives. Then the armored train finally comes along, and your whole tribe fights, and then you have to get these like anti-tank weapons to fight it. Serves as a final boss. This part's really hard compared to the rest of it, by the way. Like, it took me so long to complete it. Then I found this like special AT rifle, which I'd use to take it down almost instantly. And yeah, it ends with like the train being destroyed and like the tribe winning, and Zara and Lawrence of Arabia go off to do some navy stuff. So yeah, fairly good gameplay and story. The stealth mechanics in this game aren't too good, but it kind of worked. So yeah, that was number 6. Oh boy, now for number 5. I mentioned before that I kept juggling around 5 and 6 because I couldn't decide which position they should go in, because they are very similar in terms of story and gameplay. But at number 5 we have Nordilis from BF5. So this is really educational. I had no idea that World War II was fought in Norway. So yeah, they were right when they showed us the unseen sides of World War II, I guess. Even if they'd never showed us the fucking Eastern Front. Like, why could we not get Russia? Anyway, yeah. So you play as this member of the Norwegian resistance. I forgot her name. And you're trying to infiltrate this Nazi base in Norway. And you're trying to free this prisoner who, like, plot twist, is your mother. But I kind of already knew that, because it literally said that in My Country Calling. Like, there's a shot of the two of them hugging, and the narrator says mothers and daughters. So like, you go in on skis with like throwing knives and a rifle. This is probably the best part of it so far. Like, you have to stealthily take out guards, make your way into the complex, and eventually free your mum. So yeah, and then when she's freed, she tells you that they've got this stuff called heavy water, which they're using to make a nuclear bomb. Then she gets kidnapped again, and then throws you off a bridge. Yeah, this also has an antagonist too, but he's not really much of an antagonist. Like, he literally starts off the game by saying that he wants to go back to Berlin to see his family, and he's just doing his job really. So yeah, not much of an antagonist. Anyway, so you fall off the bridge, and there's sort of a fairly cool bit where you try to stay warm by going from like Nazi campfires to the others. Then eventually you find this cabin to stay in. Then the next morning you go around. There's an open world section, which is fairly good, I guess. And you go around blowing up heavy water stuff till eventually you get to the end where you have 2 trucks to blow up. This is the only time in the whole of BF5 where you're allowed to drive the trucks, by the way, which is good. And then at the end, the submarine comes up with the antagonist and a bunch of Nazis, and then you capture Mum on it. Then she like takes a grenade and blows the whole up, sacrificing herself. Again, this ending didn't really make me feel anything, but it was fairly good gameplay, I guess. Great stealth mechanics for a game that does not have good AI. So yeah. Right, so that was all the decent ones out of the way. Now we're moving on to the good ones, the top 4. So, coming at number 4th place, we have Friends in High Places from BF1. I came into this with very low expectations because I hadn't tried playing gameplay much, so I just assumed that I wouldn't like it. I loved it. It's so fun. So basically, you play as Clyde Blackburn, who is this American who pretends to be a famous British pilot and Earl to get into the Royal Air Force. So you start this training exercise flying around the French Alps, but then eventually the Germans attack, you have to shoot down the planes, and you eventually find the base and blow it up. And then we get to the bit that you guys saw when I did the trying to beat Water over just a shovel video. Your plane gets down, you get separated from your gunner, Wilfred, and you kind of have to fight your way through German forces on the ground before you find Wilfred, carry him back to your own base. And then eventually they find out that you're not who you say you are, then you take you back to London for court-martial, but then there's a German air raid and you manage to escape, and you convince Wilfred to get back on the plane with you. So then there's another dogfight over London. That's really good. Then you get to take on some blimps, and you get on board the blimp. Again, you guys saw that. I included that in the video. There's really good foot gameplay on the blimp. It's not really a place you'd expect to see fighting on in this mainly realistic campaign. But yeah, eventually you get to the end and use an AA gun to take down the blimps. Now, this is the ending. Oh boy. This is the best ending out of any campaign in like either of the games. So basically, there's been a narration for Clyde throughout the whole way through. There's no like telling you the story or anything. It's just a straightforward narration. And at the start, where he's pretending to be this famous pilot, he says, "Honesty isn't my best trait." Keep that in mind. So at the end, he falls into the River Thames and climbs out, stares up into the sky. The implication is that Wilfred died. He talks about how history will remember him as the guy who stole a plane, killed the gunner, and escaped court-martial in the chaos of an air raid. The narration says, "I wouldn't lie to you." Then he looks directly into the camera and says, "Would I?" Yeah, that creeped me out. And judging by like what he said in the intro about not being good at telling the truth, the implication is kind of that he actually did steal the plane, kill Wilfred, then escape, and what we see is just his telling of the story. It has a great message of how history is told by the winners. Did the message way better than Tyrella in BF5. So yeah, it has an open to interpret ending, just like the next entry on our list. So now heading into the top 3. Top 3 is really good. Probably consider it to be above COD campaign, some of the best single player experiences I've ever had. Number 2 and 3 on this list both had me close to tears at the ending. So here goes. Alright, number 3. I mentioned before that I had a hard time choosing order 5 and 6 were going in, like nothing's written nor dealers kept changing places. These two were even harder to pick, like 2 and 3 kept swapping around and kept juggling them, but eventually I decided on the 3rd place, and that's The Last Tiger from Battlefield 5. Oh boy, where do I start with this one? They had so much balls making players the Nazis. Like, even Battlefield 1, by the way, you don't have like a single war story where you even get to play as somebody on like the Axis side or whatever. It's always just the quote-unquote good guys. So yeah, I was pretty surprised to find out that BF5 lets you play as a Nazi tank commander. Yeah, I mentioned before that in my country calling, there's a brief scene in the desert. You play as that guy again, Peter Muller, German tank commander, and basically it kicks off with this narration. Like, you see him in the desert, and he tells us a random story about when he was a kid. Some other kids stole from a shop, and his dad got very mad at him because even though he didn't steal anything, he was there. And then you slowly realize that that's basically what happened to every Nazi soldier after World War II. So then it starts in some city in the Rhinelands, and
you're in a tank crew similar to My Mud and Blood, only better. So the tank crew consists of your character Peter Muller, your longtime friend the engineer Kurtz, then this young nervous recruit who I forgot the name of, and then a much more enthusiastic young recruit called Scroger. So basically you defend this city against the invading American forces. Like, they didn't even have you like rebel against the Nazis and kill them. Like, they full on like you kill the Americans that you would have been playing as in most generic World War shooter campaigns, which takes a lot of courage. Like, multiplayer games are already getting criticized for letting players the Nazis. Anyway, so basically, as you're fighting, eventually you get this like air raid, and you send out like the young nervous recruit to scout the area, but then he runs off. So you're fighting more Americans, and then you come across this street at night. This is one of the best scenes in the entire game. So as you're driving down the street, this like announcer over the speakerphone is saying that all civilians have been evacuated from the city, and as that you see a bunch of dead and dying civilians just littering the street, and then from the lampposts these of your fellow soldiers are hanging for being traitors. Then you see your commanding officer salute you underneath one of the hanging bodies, and then you eventually see like your crewmate who ran off has been hung for running away. Then eventually you get to this cathedral base before American forces surround the church. You get out the tank ready to surrender. Then your gunner, Scroget, shoots at one of the American tanks, so you're forced to get back in and fight. So you fight through American forces, eventually to get to this bridge which should take you out of the city. But as you're about to go across it, it gets blown up and you fall down. Then the final cutscene happens. This had me close to tears. So Kurtz tries to run away, and then Scroger shoots him. Like, you're being surrounded by American forces, and they're telling you to surrender, and then Scroger just straight up shoots Kurtz for being a coward. He's dying. Peter's just cradling him in his arms. Then as the Americans surround the tank, your character Peter throws away his iron cross and surrenders. Kurtz dies, and then you see Scroger points the gun at Peter. Cut to black, you hear gunshots. So just like Friends in High Places, it's up to interpretation. You know that either Scroger shot you or one of the Americans shot him. Oh boy, you think that was emotional? Time for number 2. Number 2 spot. Now, I mentioned before that I kept juggling around this and The Last Tiger for actually get 2 and 3 spot, but I eventually decided on this one. The endings to both of these ones had me close to tears. This one had me even closer though, but not fully there. I never cry at video games, because the number 2 spot is The Runner from BF1. So in this one, you play as Frederick Bishop, who is a colonial soldier working for the British Empire, supposedly like the best soldier in Australia. Then eventually you meet this new young recruit called Foster, who's a massive fan of you, lied about his age to get into the army, and he's kind of being assigned to mentor him. At first, Frederick, he's really resentful towards Foster. I think he's just this dumb kid. But eventually they get sent to storm the beaches that are occupied by the Ottoman Empire. I think they're in Greece or Turkey, I'm not sure. But yeah, you storm the beaches and make your way to this town, where eventually you meet Foster again, who saves your life. Then eventually, Frederick starts to like him. Then you go through the town and fight more Ottoman soldiers. Then eventually you discover that the commanding officers on the Dreadnought are planning to bomb their own troops. So you have to go to like this mosque where the troops are hiding out and warn them that there's an artillery bombardment incoming. Then you meet Foster again there, and then Frederick does something funny to his hat and says you're a paparazzi now, and that's like supposedly some emotional scene. And yeah, eventually then you discover that there's this fortress occupied by the Ottomans, and you have to go infiltrate that all by yourself. So you go in there, fight through the forces, eventually get to the end. You find this like radio message and like use it to bomb the Ottomans. I don't know. But then you get shot and you see Frederick slowly bleeding out as he's watching like all the Ottoman bases get bombed and then dies. Yeah, it's so sad, and it's the only like one of the war stories where you know for sure that your character dies. So yeah, that was the runner. Now, our number 1 spot on this list is next. Let's go. Well, we're at number 1 now. This is the best war story in either of the Battlefield 1 and 5 games. Those of you who know the games already know which it is by now, and that's Storm of Steel, which is the one that plays the moment you boot up Battlefield 1. Holy shit, this is good. The plot of this one is simple. This US unit called the Harlem Hellfighters has been deployed to France to fight the occupied German forces. Simple as that. I would say the character you play as, but you don't play as a character. You play as like a lot of people from the Harlem Hellfighters and the British tanks sent in to back them up. So basically, it starts off with a character who we'll call the exposition guy because he does this amazing narration for pretty much the start of every war story. But he wakes up in bed and immediately has this flashback accompanied by some classical music, where in this battlefield, there's this all-out bloody warfare between the American and German soldiers. People are getting killed in the most brutal ways imaginable, and he's just standing there to watch it. Then you play as your first guy fighting the ground troops, basically getting a gunfight with the Germans, and eventually you'll die. Then your character's name, year of birth and death appears on the screen, but instead of just responding like normal, you cut to a different character. He's operating a mounted gun, trying to stop the incoming German forces from getting up the trenches. You hold up for as long as you can before that guy dies too. Then you cut to somebody in the British tank. You go along, you have to take out a field gun and some German forces attempting to attack the tank. And then you come up to this one bit where there are 2 shell-shocked German soldiers. One of them is just mindlessly walking across the battlefield and eventually gets shot. The other one's tucked up in the fetal position and crying. Then you drive further along, do some more gunfights before the tank gets blown up and you die. Then you come to the last bit. It's this straight, flat bit of completely decimated ruined land. And you go through like 10 different soldiers, like spawn into one of them, eventually die, spawn into the next one, die. The loop repeats itself before eventually an artillery bombardment takes you all out. Then we cut back to the scene at the start of the war story of people just decimating each other, and then you see exposition guy there, and he's standing and realizes that there's one last German soldier left. They both raise their guns at each other, then hesitate for a bit and lower them. That's a scene that we get to see made into a statue at the start of My Country Calling as well. So yeah, that was the number 1 spot on our list. Well, that was it. That was all 11 war stories ranked from worst to best. I want you, anyone who's like played through them all, I want you to comment down how you'd rank them below. We can have a good discussion about it. And I think I'll end it here. Right now, I know I only do this shit for a laugh, but I'd really appreciate it if you like subscribe, maybe watch some of my other videos. I don't give a fuck about likes though. So then lads, that's the end.